Thank you. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Oh, thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm Kendall Ranges, and I'll be leading today's Coffee with Local Leader with Mr. Scott Gabriel here. Scott is the president at Parkview Whitley Hospital in Parkview, Warsaw. Just an overview of Scott for his biography. Scott joined Parkview Health in 2010 as president of Parkview Whitley Hospital. He has more than 29 years of healthcare experience, including serving in numerous senior administrative positions for more than 20 years. Scott began additionally serving as president of Parkview, Warsaw, when the outpatient facility was first announced in 2014. In 2019, Parkview, Warsaw announced its first expansion and is currently evolving into the full-service hospital. Prior to joining Parkview, Scott has served as vice president of operations for Duke's Memorial Hospital in Peru, Indiana. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of Akron, Ohio, and a master's degree in both science and business administration from the University of Akron and Ashland University, respectively, both in Ohio. And he's been a fellow with the American College Healthcare Executives since 2014. So once again, Scott, thanks for joining us. And for those in the audience, thanks for tuning in. Before we dive into the question formalities, some upcoming events I'd like to share. This Thursday, we have the in-person program, Consumer Focused Healthcare, starting at 4:15, ending at around 6:45 p.m. And then on March 15th, we have virtual coffee with the local leader, Nicole Wilson, who is the IU Health Vice President of Community Health Operations. For more information on these registration links, you can go to our website or LinkedIn. Thanks for sharing that, Corey. So first question, Scott. So can you tell us about your career and your journey and what got you into healthcare and involved with IHIN specifically?
Sure. So little different background. I was a high school athlete, had lots and lots of injuries growing up playing football and wrestling and all of that fun stuff. And it kind of really drove me into wanting to stay around sports. And it was kind of a driving force that sent me to college to become a coach and become an athletic trainer. That lasted about a year out of college, going through all of the process of getting educated, realized rather quickly in athletic training, it was kind of a second shift job. And you really were spending a lot of time standing around. And I don't know, I found leadership, I would describe leadership as a disease more than a calling. Leadership was something I couldn't help myself. I always found myself in those leadership type roles, and kind of got pulled into leading some wellness programs at the hospital I was part of at that time. That kind of developed into leading an outpatient center, sports rehab, some work hardening, pain, lots of things in the rehab world. From there, was on a committee that kind of evolved into doing workers' comp. Got pulled into HR then, and spent about 10 years in HR, doing everything from employee relations, compensation, became an HR director. And was really through that HR job that was at a hospital and had other duties as assigned, which has started to include the ancillary and support services in that role, and then came to this role in 2013. So it was kind of a jagged little all over the place career, but it always seemed to end up in some type of leadership role, no matter how I turned.
Thank you for that. And that kind of segues into my next question. So based off your leadership exposure, when did you first know it was your calling? When you first were like, this is what I meant to be?
I think it was early on when I was doing and setting up some of the wellness programs for the hospital. The previous COO said to me, she said, people do things for you, not because you're telling them to do them, but just because you ask. And it became very obvious that just creating a culture of people around me to get things done, that I always ended up being pushed to the front of that. And I have as I said, more of a disease of inability to keep my mouth shut at times, which is, I think, what leadership sometimes is you just can't help yourself and you have to say what you think, and you end up being at the front of the pack sometimes.
No, absolutely. And this kind of pairs well with my next question. So what essential skills have you seen in the industry that are pretty prevalent today that needs to be known for early careerists and aspiring leaders?
I think being humble is probably the first thing you really need to think about and learn, and realize that the further you go up the ladder, the closer it is to the exit door, and understanding that you work for the people who work for you, and you're probably one of the least important jobs some days. In healthcare, I can be gone for a week and this is still going to function. There's still going to be people here to take care of the patients. There's still going to be doctors here, nurses. Really learning to be a strategic vision and partner with people and listen to people. But leading from the rear of the pack is probably one of the things you need to humble yourself to understand is it's not going to be all roses.
Absolutely. And I think to your point, so you're president of Parkview Whitley and Parkview Warsaw. And I'm curious, it sounds like a very stressful job position. So how do you deal with stress in your everyday work life and how do you balance that appropriately?
For me, the best thing I can do is go round. In our jobs, you spend a lot of time dealing with the negative, unfortunately. You deal with the problems. You deal with a physician who's upset about something. You deal with a patient who's upset about something. You deal with the challenges that you're having financially. Spending an hour, at least 3 to 4 times a week, walking around and realizing 90% of the people who work here are wonderful, good people doing the right thing for the right reasons. Watching interactions they have with the patients really helps to recenter you back to the values and really kind of helps take you back to why you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. One more question from my end before I open the question up to the floor questions. So there are some trends in healthcare right now, such as regulation, competition, and technology and care delivery, innovative models. What is your take on the perception of where healthcare is headed and what to anticipate in the coming years?
I think one of the big focuses, and a lot of us are starting to do this, is some type of function in the digital world, and how do we meet patients? I think my aha moment came several years back when I first started to order pizzas online. I never thought that was something I needed. I didn't have a problem growing up as a kid, picking up the phone, calling the guy, talking to the guy, ordering my pizza, and eventually it came to my home. If I actually have to talk to a human now, I probably don't use that service. I go online. So I got all my things saved. It's got whatever pizzas, it's got my credit card in there. I hit deliver and it shows up at my house. Those are the type of things that our patients are looking for. They don't want to come in and wait for 2 hours to get a simple lab draw. We're still living in a kind of an antiquated world when it comes to how we treat some of our patients. Other businesses are getting ahead of us when it comes to, you can go get a haircut and go online and find out what the best time is and you make your appointment. That's what people want. And they want to be able to do those things in their home. And we're tapping into that, but we're not quite into that world as far as we need to be yet. And I think that needs to be a huge focus for us going forward.
No, thank you. And that opens up a lot of different doors from digital health solutions to patient-centered customization. Question about your pizza comment earlier. So are you Uber Eats or DoorDash? Like, what's your pick?
DoorDash, just because it's in more prevalent in the market, I think so.
Okay. Thank you. I have some other questions, but feel free for anyone to chime in to ask anything that you would want at this coffee with the local leader.
Scott, thanks for being here. One of my questions would be, how do you think that getting your fellow status assisted you in your career?
I think two functions. One, it gives you credibility as you start to interact with your peers, and it takes you in different circles. And also just that self-confidence that it gives you, that you're on the same level as you're talking to other folks. And I think, always holding that confidence level is a good thing. So there was a tremendous value just going through the process too. I'd highly encourage anyone, if you're going to do and go that route, to go to the course. Learning from the instructors as much as learning from your peers who are sitting in the course really set you up well to take the test. And I think, again, it gives you just a level of credibility. I think it's valuable to your future.
Thank you.
Sure.
See, Adam has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Kendall. Scott, nice to meet you. Appreciate your time. I'm from the Fort Wayne area, and I know I'm keenly aware of what the meaning is for Parkview to the region. Can you talk about the Parkview Warsaw transitioning to Parkview Kosciuszko and what that means for the community?
Sure. So we kind of really, that started out with a conversation with a single doctor years ago, who approached us and said, we'd really like to do something with Parkview in the market. As we got out and about in the market, we kept getting asked for more, because originally it was going to be a physician practice with a couple of physicians, lab and radiology in the practice. As we talked to the community, they wanted more from us. So we started adding in and thinking about an urgent care, which developed into a standalone emergency room, and ended up with the building we had. It was quickly in the market. We learned from the volumes we were seeing and the amount of patients who continued to request our services, that we quickly started making plans for what we're doing now. Unfortunately, we all lived through COVID and understood what that did to our worlds. It paused us for a couple of years as we got through all of that process. But what we're developing now will be a full service oncology center there. Probably the first really expansion out of the Fort Wayne market for us of a full service. We'll be doing a surgery center, which we've designed that it could be an ASC if we need it to be. Still trying to figure out which direction that's all going to go on us. We're doing 28 beds and currently talking about adding OB. We held on building OB in the original build of it, just because of the challenges recruiting OBs right now. I didn't want to build an area that I couldn't staff, and didn't have any physicians to work out of. So we're in some conversations with some OBs. As soon as we get commitments to there, we'll move forward with that. But I want, it's a chicken and egg discussion. I want the physicians before I build services. So.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, sure.
There's another question for you, Scott. It's from Corey. She says that thanks for joining us this morning. What advice do you have for those who may be 5 years post-grad and are looking to grow into leadership? What are those skills that you look for in a leader?
Willingness. I think the first thing you can do is never turn anything down. If somebody comes to you and says, I'd like you to work on this project, ask for additional work beyond the project. If there's an opportunity and they're looking for somebody to do something that's well outside of your scope, take it, learn it. I've yet to learn something I didn't think was valuable to me. There's nothing really that should ever be outside your scope as a leader, and any new opportunities to learn something new, jump on them, grab them with both hands.
Thank you. And I think too, there's some other skills that I'd like to gauge your interest on, your take as far as like networking, what's the importance of that and why early careers should strive to make it more essential skill. And on top of that, time management as well.
I think networking is just, to me, the key of networking is really being able to call people and pick up the phone for areas you just need help with or you want to talk through. Really knowing your personality well enough to know where your strengths and weaknesses are at, surrounding yourself with people who you can network, who are stronger in different areas than maybe you are. So that value of being able to pick up the phone and say, okay, here's what I'm facing. What do you got going on? Tell me a little bit about your world. Being able to reach out to kind of see what else is going on in the world is extremely helpful from just kind of a making connections, all of those things. And you never know where it takes you, but I think looking at it more from how do you learn from each other is tremendously helpful. And I apologize, I forgot the second part of that question already.
Oh, your take on time management.
Time management is yours. One of the most frustrating things I hear today is when people say the job is too demanding. The job is what you make the job. Being able to separate yourself, and I say this as a person who's not always good at this. The biggest challenge I find sometimes is leaving work at work, but that's my own fault. It's nobody telling me I have to do these things. It's that emotional tie to things you have to do and have to get done, is figuring out how you can set them aside to be with your friends, your family, and be able to put them in a bucket almost in a way for a period of time and not hold on to them, and being able to delegate to people. You've got to find people who, again, fill your voids. Hiring people who are stronger than you, who you can hand things off to, who you can learn from continuously, will help you not get stuck into that world.
Are there some essential roles to have under your belt or have experience in order to be CEO? Example, strategy or operations?
I think operations is a key one. Having some different areas you've operated in. And I think along the way with those operations is you need to fail. You need to fail along the way, and you need to be able to look at people and say, do you remember the decision I made yesterday? That was a bad decision, and be okay saying that at times. You make decisions based off of kind of what's at hand at days, and you will gain more credibility as a leader being able to say, I messed up, I made a wrong decision, and learn from those things than you ever will trying to be right all of the time. Strategy to me is about creating culture. I read something the other day, it's I'm sure been around for a long time, but it said culture is how you feel on Sunday night. And I think that's so key to creating a good culture in the organization. And one of the things we've really tried to do, and I hold near and dear to my heart, is how do you create a culture where the employees treat each other well? It's easy to talk about the patients. There's nobody I've ever met as a caregiver who said, I didn't go into this because I don't like people or I don't want to work with patients. It's always the first thing. Where you start to have challenges and where the workplace starts to fall in place is when they don't treat each other well, when they don't hold value to one another, where you have interdepartmental fighting, when you can't create that environment where we're all in this together, we're going to have tough days. I think that was especially evident during all the times of COVID, being able to reach out to folks who were in other departments. We had people doing all kinds of jobs during COVID. I had administrative assistants who were up on the floor screening patients and visitor. It was a unique time, but it was a great learning experience to say, is my culture set? And I think that's so important.
And to your point, organizational culture aligns not just the patients, but the employees and leadership to make that environment welcoming and more collaborative in nature. There's a question from Joshua.
Yeah, thank you, Kendall. Scott, thank you for being here. I just had a question regarding something you mentioned earlier about the fellowship status and how it can build credibility. So I'm a current master's student at IU, and I was a little curious as to, what are some other careers that could help build that credibility, as I begin my career search?
Are you talking about where to start, or are you talking about things outside of healthcare? I just make sure I understand the question.
Kind of where to start. I have obviously an interest in healthcare, but I'm a little curious as to, another route I could start other than going into fellowship right away. So that's my question, kind of just where to start.
Sure. I don't know that you need to, again, do the fellowship right away. I think it's something you're going to want to work towards as you get into it. I'm a big believer, start wherever you can. There isn't one set path for people. As you talk and as you network out with, I'm sure, your peers, you'll probably hear 50 different stories of how people started. I think any role that you can get yourself into some level of leadership, whether or not it's a team lead, supervisor, and you doing that is really just starting by doing. So whatever you can kind of feel like you want to get your foot in the door somewhere is a great place to start, and then you make your path from there. So I don't know that there's one simple way to say, here's the right path for people. You've seen people come out of, again, mine's more of a therapy background. I know lots of folks who came up the ranks through LTACs and then kind of converted over. Our previous CEO who just retired started as a housekeeper and became the lead through that process. So, I think wherever you can just get your foot in the door and be more committed to how you do the job than worried about what job you got right now.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep.
I have two additional questions, Scott. One is, so what are some values that you need to have as far as a leader or a follower to make sure that your career is on the right path and trajectory? The second question, I can ask that later, but
yeah, good, because I'll forget that one if you try to ask two at one time. So don't do that to me again. I think it goes back to that thought of, you have to be humble enough to understand that as a leader, you could be replaced at any time. And understanding leading people isn't always about, people say, how do you motivate people? You don't motivate people. There's no way to change somebody's intrinsic values and motivate them for it. You create an environment where if you bring the right people in, they'll be motivated. They'll drive for it. And I think it's more about trying to find who you are and what you value deep and near to your heart, and then never compromise on those. It's sometimes you're going to be asked to do things from people who you may not agree with. And you're going to have to make a decision of, am I okay with that? Is that something I can change? But not let it change who I am as a person. You might work in environments where you don't agree with some of the direction they're going. And at times you may have to say, you know what, this isn't going to be the right place for me. It's okay. And I need to move on. You're not going to be able to change every environment. So I think really trying to figure out who you are as a person first drives how your career is really going to go, and not trying to be something you're not. You're not going to last long in that, and it'll lead to some of the other things you were talking about, that internal burnout and strife and all those things that people feel is when you're trying to live a life that's not yours.
Thank you. And we're at a point in our career right now, as early careerists and even mid the seasoned professionals, that our values always change, and a lot of things are falling into place or out of place and in sync and out of sync. So thank you for that. My second question was, what is your take on the importance of personal brand?
I think it ties right back into that. It's that credibility of what you will and won't stand for, and the values that you have as a person, that you wear them on your sleeve. I think that really defines you as a person. Your willingness to put a personal brand out there more so than what it should be is what people will follow, because they want to follow something that's real. They don't want to follow something, the worst thing I think people use and people get is when they say, I want to be transparent with you. Usually what follows is, I'm going to say something really mean, but I want to kind of couch it a little bit, so I'm going to be transparent with you. It's about creating trust, where at some point in time I can be open and honest with you, and we have a value-based relationship enough so that we can have a conversation that may be a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm doing it from a good place. It's not just about being transparent. And I think that personal brand creates that environment where you can have those type of value-based relationships.
Thank you. We have a question from Corey.
I think you froze. I'll go ahead and ask it over the mic. At what moment in your career journey did you know that you wanted to be a president? Has this always been a goal, or did that change along the way?
You're correct. It did freeze there for a minute, but I think I got you back. So it changed along the way. I don't know that it was a early goal of mine. It certainly wasn't coming up through, in college and taking my first job, standing on the sidelines. But I think it was not long after I got into leadership that I started to see some folks who were in leadership who I didn't necessarily agree with the way they were leading and the culture they were creating. And it was that internal drive to say, I think I can do it better than them, that really kind of drove me forward to want to be in a leadership role. You learn early in your career, you see a couple of different things. You see people who you don't agree with how they lead, so you want to be exactly opposite. Or you see people who are just tremendous mentors and you want to do everything that they do. One of the things you learn later in your career is even the really, really bad managers had some good ideas and were doing some things that are right. And sometimes even the best mentors weren't always right, and finding who you are in between there. And I think that for me was kind of that, hey, I want to be in one of those roles because I think I've got ideas that would make a good place to work, make a good culture, and in the end of the day, be a great place for patients to receive care.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any further questions from the audience? Seeing none. Well, thank you, Scott, for taking time out of your day to speak with us today on early careers journey and what you have been through and what you see in the healthcare industry. I think that we're going to wrap it up now and give everyone back their morning. But that is all for today.